Hi, good afternoon to everyone here, and good morning to anyone who's watching in Western Australia. Welcome to our webinar on creating advanced reports. I'm Rowan, and with me here, as usual, is my team member Charissa.
Hi, everyone.
And today, we'll be looking at building some of the more complex and sought-after reports within aXcelerate. If you've attended any of our webinars on workflow automation, you may actually be familiar with some of this already, as custom reports can be used to help power a lot of automated tasks in aXcelerate. Today, however, we'll be focusing on the reports themselves and certain features that aren't necessary for automations, but are still desirable for viewing data in your system effectively. We expect a good portion of you here are probably already using aXcelerate, but for anyone who isn't, we hope this gives you a good insight into how flexible our report building tools actually are. As usual, we'll be monitoring your questions in the stream chat and answering any that we can. For any queries that we can't get to, or for those sent through to us prior to the webinar, we're collecting answers in a follow-up email that'll be sent through later on. So today we're going to be covering a few different specific reports and examples within those, namely the areas of classes for overall enrollments, unit-specific stuff, and also a few things related to our online assessments feature. Before we start getting into those though, I would like to just take a quick look at the inherent structure of reports, or the report builder, the filters and display fields. So just for some clarity, the filters in reports are used to narrow down data. When you run a class report to look at enrollments in the system, if you didn't have filters, it would pull in literally every student in the system. And often that may not be what you're looking for. So filters are used to specify and say exactly what you're trying to extract from your database. The counterpart to that are the display fields, and these are more about changing what you see in the end product. When you get your results through, you want to see certain data, and that's all governed by those display fields. So as a quick example, you might have a very simple filter of like, show me all your students who are in progress. That would just be a single filter, and it would run that and pull out that group of students. Of that group though, you might actually want to see a lot of information. You might want to know their names, what they're studying, their email addresses, and that sort of thing would go into the display fields. So just keep that in mind as we go through, that the filters will be used to narrow down. It specifies exactly what you're trying to find. Whereas the display fields, on the other hand, are used more to get things in the end product. And we're going to kind of jump between both of those as we go through. So just keep that picture in your mind. It'll help make some of these examples a bit clearer. So right now, I'm going to hand over to Charissa, who will be taking us through our first report area, the class enrollments report.
Thanks, Rowan. All right. So to get started off, we are going to jump into the reports builder. So that's under your reports builder. All right, one of the most flexible reports in the system, in the entire system really, is the venerable class enrollments report. We're going to be using the warehouse version today, which we have used before in previous webinars. Now, just a quick recap, the difference between a live and a warehouse report is that live reports will return data today to the very minute that you've entered. However, the limitation with a live report is that it doesn't do any calculations, so you will find a lot of filters or display fields missing from live reports. Now, warehouse reports are more powerful because they can do calculations. The only limitation is that it does not contain today's data. It only pulls data from yesterday and older. So if you're wondering when this data gets transferred across, if you jump into this information bubble, you can see that the data is taken from a snapshot of last evening or older. All right, let's click into the warehouse report to get started. All right, so this particular class enrollments warehouse report is designed to look at specific student enrollments in accredited courses, but it does contain a huge number of filters and display fields that allows it to fulfill multiple purposes. I'm going to start off with an overview of the display fields available here and introduce to you some of the more handy and less known ones. So here's a little tip for everyone watching the webinar. When you click into the display field to add filters, if you enter the percentage symbol, as so, all right, you'll see a lot of options in terms of what sort of filters, percentages it can return. But what I'm interested today and what I'm focusing on is the competent percentage filter. If you click into it, you will see that it provides you with several options. You can filter students based off their competency percentage. So for example, if I were to enter 75%, what this means is that the report will return all students whose competency percentage is less than 75. You can set all these parameters up as, whatever you wish for it to. All right. What's also handy when you add a filter to your report is to include it in the display field. So all these filters should be available in the display field as well, and you can add on to it. And this percentage will appear on your report as well. The next one we can introduce to you is the qualification award. So if you type the word award in the filter, you can either pull a qualification award filter or the statement of attainment awarded. Now this allows you to toggle between yes and no. So you can say I want all students, or I want to see all students who have not been awarded a full qual or have not been awarded a statement of attainment. So this allows you to track if students have been issued with any kind of award or if you've missed any. All right. The next handy filter we can look at, I'm just going to take some of these out to declutter the screen, is the organization string search. So if you type some keywords here, I'm going to focus on the participant details organization string search. And this is especially useful if you are dealing with trainees or apprentices and you want to look at students who come from a certain employer. So you can say that, students whose organization starts with or contains a particular company name. Another very useful field to use is the word contact category. All right, so this filter can be very powerful if you are looking at students from specific groups. For example, international versus domestic, trainees versus funded or non-funded, vet student loans versus something else, or state funding. Next, I'm going to display or introduce to you some of the fields that you can find in the display fields that will help you check for missing information. So the first one I want to introduce, if I type the word funding, so that's just a handy word to type in, is either the state funding or the national funding. So by including these two display fields into your report, this allows you to check if you've missed entering the funding source, either state or national, for any student. So very handy to have in your reports. And this allows you to avoid or reduce any reporting errors when it comes to your NCVO or VETMIS reporting time. Now, moving on, if you are dealing with finances or if you're using aXcelerate to raise invoices, we've got also quite a few handy fields that you can add to your filter. So if you type the word invoice, you can say, I want to look at the number of invoices paid. So it could be greater or equal to 1. Similarly, I want to look at all students who have overdue invoices. So if you type the word overdue, all right, you can say that I want to look at all students who have at least one overdue invoice. So let's filter out these students. So these are all very useful filters to include in your class enrollments report. Finally, we also have this do not report a VETMIS filter here, and this allows you to find any enrollments that have been flagged in the system to be excluded from a VETMIS reporting. So this is what this filter does if you were to include it into your filter.
It's handy to find perhaps students that flag's been turned on for, that you actually do need to include in your VETMIS data. It can be hard to locate them again just through the VETMIS reporting tool because they're being left out of it. So by running it through the report builder here, you can find those individuals and perhaps correct it if they're meant to be showing up.
That's right. So some of these filters and display fields, once again, may not be available in the live version of this same report. So keep in mind which version of the report you are running, whether it's live or warehoused. Occasionally, it can be hard to find groups or tallies in the standard results table of your report. So to make things easier, we can use this designer button to allow you to create groupings in the data, which aXcelerate can calculate or tabulate for you. So if you've been wondering what this designer button does or have never used it before, this is a great starting point. Let's go into the designer and select some groupings. we'll start with the qualification code as a top level, followed by a secondary level of an enrollment status. What this does is we're setting the groupings, which you can see later on how it all looks like. All right, let's go done. I'm going to take out all these filters because that's too many. And we're simply looking at a very simple filter of the enrollment date. So it's going to be a very big report, and we're going to look at all students who were enrolled before today. All right. Okay. If I hit the submit button, it's going to return a very large data table. So the first view you get by default is your data table. It's simply a table. It doesn't have any sort of calculation or groupings. Now, I'm going to switch this over to the print format, and that's actually related to your designer button. If I click into it, let's see what it returns. Now, if you remember, I've started with a grouping of qualification code followed by the enrollment status. And this is how the grouping returns its results. I can see all students who have been enrolled into this business diploma, BSB 50215. And I can see that we've got one student who has completed, followed by a bunch of students who are in progress, which is what IP stands for. We also have TENT, which stands for cancelled. So you can see much more qualitative and meaningful data over here. You can also collapse these sections and it shows a summary. So by collapsing, it tells you the number of records. And if I collapse this even further, all right, it shrinks the table down even further so that you can see a very simplified version. Similarly, you can expand or collapse at your will. All right. Now, one of the most common questions we get is how to save a report. All right, so if you have problems saving a report, here are some tips and tricks. When going back to your report section to retain your filters, please do not click on the back browser because it does sort of trickle off people up. So do not click on this back button. Instead, we want to use the back tab within the aXcelerate report section. So clicking on this back button here, not in the browser, takes you back to your previously saved report filter. So you retain what you had entered. If you hit the back button, it actually takes you back to the original report section with and does not save your filters. All right, so now that you're here, let's hit submit. We're not going to change anything. You have to hit the submit button in order to save it, and that's where the save button pops up. So simply click into that save tab here. All right, rename your report as what you would like to call it. You can pop in a little description. That's quite handy to let people know what this report is about. And if you're using this for workflow or sharing it with other team members, do set this to share internally equals to yes, and you can save this report. All right, so I'll just call this a webinar test. All right, and submit that. And that's how you save your report. When you save your report, it actually sits under reports, saved reports. So you can retrieve whatever you had saved over here. In order to open up the report, simply hit the play button. And that takes you back to your pre-saved filters and pre-saved display fields. All right, now let's quickly examine how to build those two useful reports with the class enrollments. And Rowan's going to take you through this.
Thank you, Charissa. So we've looked a lot at the different features, filters, fields, and designer, all within the class enrollments report. So now let's take it further and look at some practical examples. I kind of want to reset everything we have going on here. So I'm going to go back to the reports menu up top. And once we're in here, I'm going to go back into the class enrollments warehouse version like we were doing earlier. And that should bring us back to the report where we can rebuild this to meet those examples. So the first one to look at is a situation where we're wanting to track students who have effectively finished all their studies, they've got all their units completed, however, they have not had their awards issued. Within aXcelerate, there isn't really anything that would automatically issue a certificate or a statement of attainment. That's something a user will have to manually do. So it's useful to have a report to check if that's being performed. To achieve this, we'll probably take out, say, all these filters for the moment. And we're going to use one that we looked at very start, the percentage competent up in here. This will calculate based upon the units of competency. If this is at exactly 100%, 200, 100%, this means every single unit in the enrollment has been made competent to some degree. So this should cover all students that have 100% finished all of their work. We also want to check for the students that have met that percentage but haven't had their award issued. So we're going to go and use that other filter we looked at before, the full qualification awarded. And in this case, we're going to check ones that equal no. So now we are specifically filtering down. We're looking for students who have finished everything but are still waiting on their final certificate to be awarded. To check our work in the actual results, we're also going to go to the display fields and add in the ones we put in earlier. So that percentage competent, that full qualification awarded. And I'm also going to add the filter for statement of attainment awarded, just to check, maybe that these people have actually gotten a statement issued to them before, and that's why people aren't following up, because they don't realize that now they need to issue the full qualification. So just a little bit extra in the results for us to check against. Those three have appeared down the bottom in here, so they'll be part of the results. We can move these around if we so want, but I'm just going to leave it as is and hit done to save that. And then we can hit submit and see if we draw in any data based upon our filters. Take a moment as it churns through, and we can see that we've got a large number of results. We can see in those display fields appearing as table headers that we have indeed, these people are all at 100% competency, but in fact, none of them have had their award issued yet. Furthermore, we can also see none of them have even had a statement of attainment issued. So this is probably something we'd have to go over to our admin or student services team, maybe investigate why these awards aren't being pushed out, especially given that some of these completion dates are well in the past. So as you can see, this is a nice little practical report to do that kind of validation or checking with your system, just to make sure those processes are being followed. With that said, we're going to head back now and look at a slightly different example, like so. And in this case, we're going to look at another sort of, validation check. We're going to look for students that are in the system. They are indeed progressing students, but they're lacking funding codes. This has implications both for just standard VETMIS reporting. If you don't have national or state funding codes, they may not be included. And also potentially for those of you with state funding. If you're trying to report to Queensland and New South Wales and you don't have certain codes or you're missing a contract, again, you might run into some errors when you're trying to submit your data. So to get around that and make sure that's being followed, we're going to change our filters here. I'm going to remove those two. I'm going to keep it quite simple, actually. I'm only going to use a single filter for status. If I can type that in correctly, that would definitely help. There we go. So the enrollment status, like so. And we're just going to look for students that are in progress. So those who are just currently studying, they haven't yet finished, and they're not tentative. So this should pull in quite a number of students, most of the system at this stage. In the display fields, though, we're going to put a few things to check to make sure these in-progress enrollments have all the right stuff. If we open this up, the ones we're going to put in are the funding codes that Charissa showed earlier. Funding source national code. So any accredited student should have one of these. So we'll definitely want to check to make sure that's filled in. We'll also add the state-based one. So if any students are accessing state-based funding, they will likely need this as well. And just to further check, if they're under that state funding, there's a good chance they may also need a contract. So I'm going to add that as well, just to, again, sort of double check. There we go. So all these will appear in the results, whereas this one simple filter will pull in every in-progress student. So now, if we run that, it should pull us through. We'll get another list. Should be a bit bigger because it's everyone. And we can immediately see here the gaps that are appearing on the right. These are the extra display fields that were added. These couple students actually don't even have a national funding code. So if they're studying accredited training, that could be a problem. It means they might be left out of the VETMIS reports entirely. So we probably want to go through and correct that in the system. These ones down here have a funding code in national. That's what we want. They don't have a state one or a contract, but this is the domestic standard student. There's a chance they're just not accessing state funding. So that's probably fine. But you can see this kind of report is quite useful for that purpose, just quickly analyzing groups, and by the display fields, you can readily identify gaps in the data and correct it if necessary. So that's just the main spread of the class enrollments report. There's a lot more we could cover on this. This is a very flexible report. It has a ton of filters and display fields. But we're going to continue on now. I'm going to hand back to Charissa as we look at something a bit more specific, the unit enrollments report.
All right. Okay, so with the unit enrollments report, let's head back to the report section. The unit enrollments report actually sits under here. So if you jump into the unit of competency enrollments, what this report does is it shares many similarities with the class enrollments report, but it looks at specific units rather than overall courses. This is especially useful for you if you're trying to look at specific unit outcomes, something that can apply when, for example, you're trying to determine your ratios of competent versus credit transfer versus RPL outcomes. Or perhaps you're trying to determine which units you're likely to be paid for under certain states. Or state government funding, and this can be then confirmed later using our auto contract reconciliation tools in aXcelerate. You may also be wanting to examine which previous competencies are approaching their expiry dates. Like any other report, you'll need to build this out with both filters for narrowing down on your results and display fields to ensure that your results contain the information you wish to view. So let's have a look at an example report for unit of competency. So jumping into the warehouse version. So one report that's very commonly generated would be units that are approaching their expiry date, and you may need to remind your students or update anything in the system. So the first thing I want to do is just to remove all the filters I don't need. All right. And then the first filter I'm going to add to the list is the unit of competency filter, because I want the system to look at a very specific unit. Otherwise, it's going to pull everything from the database. For this purpose of this exercise, we're going to look at the CPR unit. So I'll select that. The next filter I want to look at is the days until current competency. So days until. Now this one allows me to set a date range of what you're looking at. So for the purpose of today's demonstration, I'm going to enter 300 because we have a lot of test data. Now, if you're wanting a more qualitative approach and make your report more meaningful, you can set a value between, say, 30 to 60 days. So look at all students whose CPR or first aid unit is expiring in 30 to 60 days time. Now remember, this filter will only work if you have set a validity period against the relevant units of competency. So in order to do that, let's have a look at our unit of competency library or database, and we'll search for the first aid unit. All right, let's click into the CPR unit. You can see that we have already set a validity period of 12 months, and that's what aXcelerate will look at to do its calculation. Finally, the third filter I'm going to add in here is the outcome code. So with the outcome code, I want to say that it only includes 20, 51, or 60. So these are all the completed outcomes. Show me all students whose CPR unit is about to expire in less than 300 days and who have completed this particular unit. Similarly, I want to make sure these filters are in my display fields. So by default, I've already got the unit code. I may want to include the days until current competency expiration. And I also have the outcome code here. So I can move these display fields around as such to rearrange how I view the data in my report. If I go done and hit the submit button, all right.
On the unit report may take a little longer than the class enrollments, and that's because it's looking at actually a lot more little data sets.
That's right. Okay, there's a lot more data involved in the unit reports. So we can see that there are actually 3 students who meet this particular criteria, and they have been competent and they will be expiring this particular unit within 300 days. All right, so it's just very helpful to check your results for accuracy, and bear in mind that the unit of competency report will pull in every result. So if you have students who are doing similar units, they will return every single result in this particular table. All right, okay, let's look at the second example relating to units. Okay, so we are basically going to look at the system for units that have not received or been updated to a competence status, but the students have completed all their assessments. All right, so basically what we're doing here is we are checking in the system to see if the administrator has forgotten to update a student's unit outcome. So once again, I'm just going to clear these filters and start from scratch. The first thing or the first filter I'm going to add is basically the competency outcome code. This time I want to say that it excludes anything that's got a completed status, so anything that's 20, 51 or credit transferred. The next filter I'm going to add on, and here's a little tip and trick for everyone watching this video. If you simply type the letters NUM, they stand for number, and you can get the system to show or display a lot of number-related filters. What we're looking for in this case is the number of online assessments remaining equals to 0.
Bear in mind too, these filters will only be applicable if you are using our online assessments feature, which is Turbo exclusive.
That's correct. All right, and number of online assessments failed. All right, and we're going to add one more filter, which is the number of online assessments total. What this particular filter setup means is that I want to look at all students who have not been resulted as competent, and they do not have any more online assessments remaining to do. They've failed none of their assessments, so they've passed everything. And finally, they have been assigned to at least one online assessment. So this makes sure that, so I'm going to set greater or equals to 1. Essentially, this filter allows us to exclude any students who were not assigned any online assessments at all.
We just use the first two up there, number remaining and number failed. If someone was in no assessments, then their number failed or remaining would still be 0. So that third one ensures that we're only looking at people who actually have assessments to get results in.
Right, so that's correct. And similarly, I'm going to add these filters to the display fields as well, so that we can see what we're looking at in total. Let's go done and simply hit the submit button. All right. Okay, so we have returned some results. So what this tells us is that we've got all these students sitting in the system. They've passed all their assessments. They've completed everything, but for some reason, their competency outcome has not been resulted to C. So this is really a good chat that you can have if you are handling this error in a system.
Bear in mind that we have a setting in place that can actually automatically update units from CA to competent if all the assessments have been completed. So the same report can be used if you have that setting too, to check that that feature is in fact working. So whether you're manually resulting your units or you're relying on automation, this is still a good report to have just to make sure it is updating as expected.
All right, now next up, we're going to look at online assessments and its relevant or meaningful reports, and Rowan's going to take over.
Sure thing. So with that last report, we did see how you can run units and see what assessments are hanging off them. We're going to get more specific now and look at more into assessments themselves. So for that, I'm just going to return back to the system and to our report builder up here. All right. Now we're going to go down the list, and I'm just going to stop us here and point out these two reports here. No, they do say assessments. However, these two here relate very specifically to this section of aXcelerate, the legacy or standard assessments. So it may be the case that you're simply not utilizing these. Indeed, if you are using the online assessments that are found in here, you are most definitely not using legacy assessments over on this side. So if you're running these reports and you're finding you're just never getting any data back, your results are constantly empty, it may be the case that you're simply just looking in the wrong area of aXcelerate. For the reports that do target online assessments, those actually live a bit further down. If we keep scrolling, you'll see under the e-learning section, we have our online assessments reports, and these are a bit more expansive, and these will indeed target that section up here. Now, we could potentially go into this online assessments one first and foremost, but I will let you know that this targets assessments as a whole. It doesn't give you many details about the people inside those assessments. So for a lot of the checks and the examples we'll look at today, we're going to target more of stuff down here. The online assessment enrollments and attempts will look more at specific students inside assessments. So it's often a lot more useful on a day-to-day basis. Now, a very commonly requested report is one that shows all the assessments that have been submitted, but have not yet been marked. We have tools in place to help trainers and assessors easily mark assessment submissions, but it's still nice to have a report that you can run and just ensure that it is in fact being done. The easiest way to do that is to go into an online assessment enrollments report. You'll see that these actually don't even have a live capacity. You must run them in warehouse. That's simply due to the nature of assessments themselves. They're a little too large and cumbersome to run at a live capacity, so you'll have to choose a warehouse report in that case. But that is fine. It will contain all the filters and display fields that we want. So once we're in here, we firstly, and as usual, need to configure down our filters. So to find the assessments that have had work put in and need to be marked, we can base that pretty much entirely off this online enrollment status over here. There are a few statuses to choose from. The one we want is the submitted. If a student is enrolled, they've been put into an assessment, but they haven't even launched it yet. If they're in progress, they have started their assessment, but not actually finished it or given it across to the trainer or assessor. If they've submitted it, they've finished the assessment, they've put in all their work, but it has not been marked in any way, shape, or form. So this is the group of students we're wanting to look at. These other statuses would apply if it had been marked or cancelled out, so we won't be worrying about them. We just want to target those submitted groups. Up top, we could specify certain assessments. We could say only show the submissions for a certain assessment up top. We won't worry about that today. We'll look at everything, so I'm going to chop those two filters out. Now, we could just run it based on this one here alone, but that would pull in every submission in the system. And if you've got a lot of assessments, that actually might be quite a lot. So it is useful to filter it down a little bit more. In this case, I'm going to use the due date filter in here. So I'm only going to look for submissions that were due within this current month. If our students have been really proactive, maybe they've submitted an assessment that isn't due for another 6 months, they'll be excluded from this report. They're probably not that important to check up and mark on. But these people, where their work is due a lot more currently, they're probably a bit more important, and we should make sure they're getting marked appropriately. Before we run this report, it's always important to check your display fields. We open that up here. As Charissa's mentioned, it's best to add the existing filters as display fields as well to check your work. I'm going to put in the enrollment status. Do note that it is the enrollment status as well. If you put this in, that shows the status of the assessment as a whole, which rarely changes that much, whereas this one here will show the individual student status, which is what we're interested in. We're also going to add, quite an important one here, is the assessor. Remember that assessors are people who are able to mark the assessments. So if we ran this report without this display field, we would see the people who've had submissions, but we wouldn't actually know who's responsible for marking that. So it's pretty important we include that in the results so we can follow those people up. So I'm going to add in the assessors there, hit done, and now we should be able to run this report and see who needs marking. This may take a moment as it pings through, but you can already see some of the display fields like assessors showing up here and the status over on the right. And they should pull in a fair few students. Do bear in mind that, there we go. And you can see that we've only got one, thankfully. We've just got Net Pulaski. So they've submitted their work. You can confirm that over in here. And we can also see that the person designated to mark it is Heather Lane. So we can get in touch with Heather and say, this submission's been put in. There's a reason that it has been marked, and follow it up accordingly. Like we saw with class enrollments, you would be able to save this report, and you could potentially rerun that maybe on a daily basis just to ensure that your assessors are using the tools available to them and are marking the content. You can also use the same online assessment enrollments report to get more qualitative data on how your assessments are going, and that's done through the designer that we saw earlier. What I'm going to do is I'm going to jump back to preserve everything I already have. So I'm going to keep the same filters and display fields, but I'm going to change up these filters. I'm going to look for a larger spread of assessments. So let's get rid of these two. Let's instead look for assessment enrollments as per a enrollment date. Perfect. So this is the date that people were put into an assessment. I'm going to look for any that were done before today, which should get pretty much every assessment enrollment in the system. So that's a pretty large group of students. To get the qualitative data we're referring to, we're going to go to the designer and put in some groupings. The ones we're going to use in this case, the top level will be the assessment. So we're going to see each individual assessment. And then below that, we want to group on the enrollment status. So we can see basically how people are tracking within each assessment in the system. With that set, I'm going to hit done. and run the report to get the results pull through. Should take a moment there. Quite a lot of people, as we're seeing with data tables, it does just lay it out like this with each person their own individual line. But if we jump over to that print format, it'll feed in our designer groupings, like so. And so we can squeeze this down. We're seeing how we can collapse this. So if I drop this down to a lower level, we get some information about our assessments. We can see in this case study, we have one person who's completed, they've submitted the assessment, they've been marked fully competent, good to go. We've got 2 people who are enrolled, so they haven't actually even started the assessment yet, which may be concerning. And we've got 2 people here who submitted their work, but they actually haven't been marked yet. This person here, they've actually submitted their work and they've been marked and they need to do it again, so they've actually not passed. In comparison, this one here, the quiz we have going, 3 people have finished this successfully. 2 people haven't started it yet. Only 1 person needs marking. So at a quick glance, we can kind of get the idea that people aren't doing as well in the case study as they are the session quiz. And you can imagine this could get more expansive as you have more data and as you look at more assessments. So that's all coming out of the same report. We've looked at how to check who's been marked or who hasn't been marked. And the same report can pull some information in general about how well your assessment's performing.
All right. So we've got a lot of good questions coming through, but before we wrap up the session, I just wanted to very quickly demonstrate one of the questions that have come through. So a question was asked to see how can we download or extract the results of a report. So I'm just going to very quickly demonstrate where that sits. I'm going to go into the save report and run that. All right, so any report can be very easily exported from aXcelerate by going to this little export tab here. All right, due to a limited amount of time, we can't answer every question here today, but that wraps up today's webinar on creating reports of a more advanced nature. And hopefully this gives you an idea of how to use the report builder more effectively. All right, let me just, and what key terms and symbols you can enter that unlocks the less known filters and display fields. So if you've popped any questions in the chat room, we'll be putting together the responses to your questions in a more comprehensive manner.
Thank you, Tom, for getting those together.
Yes, thank you, Tom, and send those out very shortly. So depending on responses, we may consider putting together a part 2 webinar on advanced reports. Thanks so much for joining us and have a great day.
See you guys.
Thank you.